Yeah, we'll just give it a minute before we begin, just to let everyone join. I can see the attendance is going up, so that's good. I'll just give it about 30 seconds, then we'll start. Okay, I think we're good to go. Let's make a start. So, firstly, welcome everyone. Good afternoon, good morning to those on the West Coast. Welcome along to today's Marshall Scholarship webinar. Firstly, thank you for joining, and apologies for last week for the rescheduling. Hopefully, those who have signed up have managed to make it today as well. If not, we are recording this session, and we'll make sure we pass that recording along so everyone will be able to follow up and hopefully get the benefits of this session. So today we are focusing on navigating the Marshall Scholarship essay prompts. So some of the objectives for today is to try and do a bit of a deeper dive into the Marshall Scholarship personal statements and the essays. Firstly, before we get into that, I'd just like to introduce our panel today. And firstly, just welcome Megan along from NAFA. Thank you very much for all your help and for us reaching out to the fellowship advisors. Is always much appreciated. I don't know if you want to say a few words at this point.
Just thanks for working with us, especially while Haley was out on leave. Glad to see lots of folks here, and I'm particularly excited to hear more about the ambassador potential piece, since that's changed for this year. And I know that may be useful even for institutions that have already selected their nominees as they're making final revisions to their applications.
I think that's a good point, Megan. Given the time of year that we are, so the application deadline, Haley, you'll correct me, but as for the applicants will be 24th of September. So we are now getting towards that point where we are fine-tuning and refining the application. So hopefully this session will give some kind of helpful tips and prompts of how to do that over the next 3 weeks before that deadline comes. So let me just introduce the rest of our panel who are going to hopefully help us with that objective. We have Haley from the MAC who's with us today. And then we also have Anna Quitter, who is a Marshall alum from the class of 2007, I believe. And Anna is currently serving on our DC selection committee. So she'll be able to give us that perspective from the selection committee and what they're looking for and how they're assessing applicants. And then we also have Samara Zuckerberg, who is a current scholar studying and just done your first year over in the UK. So we're going to pick Samara's brain and find out how she went through the application process herself and her recent experiences on that as well. So the plan will be I'm going to ask some predetermined questions to our panel and get the conversation going. Thank you to those who have sent forward some questions already via the Google form. When they register for this, we'll look to address some of those common questions and themes that came out on that. But there is a Q&A panel here on the webinar, so please feel free to write any questions you would like us to have a look at. If we don't have time to answer them today, we will take them away and try and address them in future webinars or information sessions we can hold. So to start us off, I'm going to pass over to Haley, who will give us an overview of the remainder of the selection criteria and the personal statement prompts.
Hi everyone, thanks Kevin, and thanks so much everyone for joining today. We really appreciate you taking the time out to hear more about the program and the application. And we wish you good luck, as I know this is a busy period, not just for Marshall applications, but other scholarship, fellowship programs as well. So just to kind of touch on what Kevin said, I just wanted to remind everyone of the three selection criteria, which are academic merit, leadership potential, and ambassadorial potential. And I thought it would also just be helpful to kind of remind everyone that we're looking for candidates who can fit all of those criteria in different ways so that they can excel academically as scholars, as leaders, and as contributors to an improved US-UK understanding. So that's kind of where the ambassadorial piece kind of comes in, and it really does touch on the program objectives. And one of those program objectives is to motivate scholars to act as ambassadors from the USA to the UK and vice versa throughout their lives. So that's obviously starts on the award, but we really want them to continue to have that ambassadorial piece even after the award ends and as they continue into their careers, whatever those might be. So just as a reminder, the academic merit, leadership potential, and ambassadorial potential criteria are on our website. So if you kind of go into the apply section, there's eligibility, and there are links for each of those. So it goes into quite a lot of detail on what each of those criteria mean. So I'm not going to read them out to you, but that's where you can find where they are in the website. So for example, academic merit looks at the quality program of study, the knowledge of proposed courses and supervisors, evidence that the academic background is strong and relevant to those programs that they're proposing, and the quality and breadth of their recommendations, two of which should come from an academic point of view. So like I said, the website goes into more details on each of those kind of subheadings, but that's what the academic merit criteria is looking for, and so that's what they should address in their academic merit personal statement. And then leadership potential. So kind of the main headlines are the ability to deliver results, strength of purpose, and creativity. Again, the website goes into more detail on those, but those are three top headings that applicants should address. And then on the ambassadorial potential. So that's knowledge of US-UK relations. And again, that's not that we're saying that applicants should be up to speed on, every single US-UK link that there could be, but a knowledge of kind of what they're studying or what their kind of career path or proposed academic courses, how that kind of fits into the US-UK understanding, not necessarily general knowledge over all things US-UK, because I know that would be an almost impossible ask. And the second one is evidence of transferable extracurricular activities, interpersonal skills and ability to engage with others, and self-confidence and ability to seize opportunities. So those are kind of the different criteria that should be addressed in those personal statements. So we really are looking for scholars who can demonstrate that they know how to navigate between communities and, that are bridge builders and how they've done that in their life thus far. So I hope that's helpful to give an overall picture. But I think what you're all probably here for is to get the perspective of Samar and Anna. So I'll hand over to you, Kev, for the next part.
Thank you very much, Haley, for that. I'm going to turn to Anna now, and I think let's just jump straight into it with the ambassadorial potential essay. It is one that we did get a few kind of questions on prior to this Google form. So Anna, just from your perspective as on a committee, what are you looking for when you're reviewing that ambassadorial essay? Some of the questions we've got through are asking for tips when writing or how to advise their applicants on how to write that essay. And there's also people wondering how best to go around that for an applicant who's not academically involved in a field like international relations or politics along those lines. So just your kind of thoughts on that section.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. So firstly, I've been on the committee, the selection committee since I think 2018. So I, like many of you, have been on a journey with the evolution of these questions and how we evaluate them. I will say that I appreciate that the commission continues to tweak these questions, trying to get even more to the heart of those criteria that Haley mentioned. So I think, as many of you know, we're required to rate candidates against those criteria. We have to give them a numerical score. And so when I'm evaluating, I am always looking at those criteria and how those criteria are interpreted by that year's essay prompt. So that's number one, is, are they answering the mail? Are they ticking the box? Are they doing what we ask them to do in the essay? And are they doing that through a lens of making sure that we can evaluate those criteria that Haley mentioned? So that's the first thing. Secondly, like, I hear you on this question about if you're not in international relations, how do you answer? I actually am an astrophysicist. And so I feel very acutely that it's not as easy as just saying, oh, my career will be in international relations, and therefore I will spend my career building and maintaining these strong international relationships. But that said, I do think that your non-IR candidates can talk about how their field and their experiences interrelate with the United Kingdom. So there is tremendous scientific collaboration that happens between our two countries and broadly between the US and Europe. So you could talk about how you are excited about being part of international collaboration and how that can inform the work that you do when you return to the US. You could also, I also think about, this student is going to be in the UK, most of them for 2 years. We want to make sure that this student is prepared and to hit the ground running with integrating into the UK experience. And so I like to see evidence that this student has thought ahead to what types of activities they could continue to do or initiate in the UK so that they will hit the ground running and really forming those people-to-people connections. At the end of the day, the Marshall Scholarship, it is a public diplomacy program of the British government. Don't mean to speak for you, Haley, but I welcome you to say this is, build on this. And so as a public diplomacy program that people like me are charged with helping select the scholars for, we have to think about, has this applicant thought about how they will fit into this tapestry of diplomacy and building these strong people-to-people connections between our countries. And so I look for evidence of that in the ambassadorial essay. And it doesn't just have to be academic, right? It could be, I have this particular hobby that is, especially American, and I want to take that over to the UK and introduce people to it or build on it. Or I have this hobby that would be really well matched to, this particular organization at my proposed institution. And I'm excited to continue that. It could be those types of things. I'll say my last point on this is keeping in mind that we have one person from either the embassy or the consulate on the selection committee. And so they are always thinking, how does this student, this applicant, connect with the mission of this scholarship program? Why do they need to go to the United Kingdom to do this program? How does the Marshall Scholarship in particular make sense for them in this program? So those are some other questions that typically come up in the discussion around the ambassadorial essay.
Perfect. Thank you, Anna, for that. While we're on it then, shall we move across to the other two criteria that you reviewed during these essays? So the academic plan and then the leadership potential. When you're looking at those essays, what are those writing parts? What are you kind of looking at when you're reviewing those sections for those criteria?
So for me, let me talk about academic plan. So we are looking to make sure that, and this is a general statement, the application, we read the whole thing all together in as one big self-consistent 25+ page document. So making sure that the academic plan makes sense with the proposed institutions, making sure that it makes sense with the proposed future post-scholarship plans, making sure that the academic plan is supported by or makes sense with the other pieces like the personal interest section, your employment or / volunteer activities, right? Does this all make sense as a person doing these things together? And so that's one piece of it. Another thing is, again, trying to understand why are they going to the United Kingdom? Is there a way that they could accomplish these? Do they need to go and be paid by the British taxpayer for this activity? And you know, the answer obviously for many people is yes, but making that case. And again, it can be done not just for international relations. I mean, there's science cases, there's lots of cases why it makes sense. But I think the really key thing for the academic program is making sure that it makes sense and it hangs together with the rest of the application. I would say this is something that I see especially for folks who want to come and do the Marshall, and then their plan is to go to medical school afterwards. And so I say, okay, I'd like to see an explanation. If your goal is to be a practicing family medicine clinician in the United States, how does your academic plan fit in with that long-term career goal? Making sure that you can really articulate that and explain it. And just as one example that I see pretty regularly, I'm the lead STEM evaluator for the embassy, so for the DC region. So that's an example from my experience. And then what was the other one? Did you want me to say about leadership? Oh, should we go to Haley first, maybe?
Yep. We can go to you, Haley.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Anna. I just wanted to jump in before we move to leadership to just kind of echo what Anna was saying, and that how important doing the research before you press submit is on those courses and plans, because they really will be fleshed out in the interview if that research has been done. And, you know, if it is a PhD or a DPhil or research degree that you're wanting your students want to pursue, you know, do they meet the eligibility requirements of that course? And have they thought about, you know, what supervisor is going to work with them? Have they reached out to them? Have they, you know, already started those conversations? It's really important that they can demonstrate that, especially for research and DPhil or PhD programs. If so, you know, we do have quite a short turnaround between when the application deadline is and when the selection process happens and when applicants are notified if they've been offered an award. It's around, you know, end of September to mid-November. So we wouldn't expect that if candidates have done the proper research and, you know, are wanting to go to pursue these courses because of what they are and what they represent, and because they're in the UK, that we wouldn't expect there to be, you know, finalists who then the next week ask if they can change the course that they put on their application and apply for another course. So, you know, the commission are going to be a lot stricter on that, and for parity across all applicants. So just to remind you all that whatever your applicants put as their first and second choices on their application, they'll be held to those. And that's what the selection committees are going to be, you know, conducting their interview based on the courses that are outlined and that full picture plan that Anna was speaking to. So just wanted to add that in.
Perfect. Thanks, Haley, for that. Really good points made. Anna, do you want to move on to the leadership essay now?
Sure, leadership. So this is one that I feel, especially the criteria that are on our website, we have the 4 elements of leadership that are on there, that this is something that over the years we see some challenges in essays addressing these. So our number one, I guess these are not rank ordered, but number 1 on the list here of 4 equally weighted is ability to deliver results. So we're looking for, at least when I'm reading these things, I'm looking for, what did you do? What's the so what? What happened? What's the impact? You can report that with data, right? You know, I had this many members, you know, I started this club, I had this many members, and then at the end of year 3, we had tripled the number of members or something, right? You can talk about it like that, but again, it's more about what's the impact that you've had. Now you can do this, you know, it doesn't mean that everybody has to start their own nonprofit and that's the only way to demonstrate leadership. I believe very strongly in working within existing structures, if that's what your applicant has done. But how is that structure different, hopefully better, because of that applicant's involvement? How has the applicant grown self-awareness is one of our leadership criteria. I have seen successful leadership essays about something not going quite the way the applicant had intended, and how the applicant learned from that and how they grew from it. It does not have to be that you are, leading thousands of people and mega events. Now that said, though, I do encourage you to really think about the scale of impact, right? Because this is a competition, and there are folks that have, it's a very competitive pool. So on the STEM side, I sometimes see folks where they talk about how, they were a tutor at a local school and they made an impact as a tutor. But then I'm like, tutoring at local schools is a very common activity in STEM. So how has this activity changed? How has it improved? Did you create a system? What happened because you were involved that demonstrates leadership? So it's not just filling a leadership role. It is the activities you've done, the improvements, the growth that you have felt and the organization has felt, and the impact that you've had in that leadership role.
Perfect. And then just finally, just to finish on this section here, overall, are there any kind of like common mistakes you see in these personal statements or essays that you might want to just flag here?
I would say a pretty common mistake I see is folks who don't, I get it, right? Your applicant has been writing this thing probably for like 4 to 6 months, and they didn't take a step back and say, hey, a complete stranger is going to read this thing all through all 25 pages. Does this all hang together? Does this make sense? And so I would say that's a common mistake, is that the self-consistency can be off. I would say another common mistake I see is not addressing our criteria. Sometimes in the leadership essay, we see people who they talk about their own theory of leadership, which, okay, but we have a theory of leadership. It's called our criteria that are on our website. So we want, if you're going to be doing that, I mean, that's going to take a lot of words, right, to explain how your theory of leadership interfaces with our required leadership criteria. So I think that those sometimes can be challenges that I see. And I would say maybe the last kind of common, or one more I'll highlight, is sometimes these essays come through as if they are written by multiple different voices, right? And it's or like a robot, right? Because I get it, we've all been there. You're editing this thing and you're fine tuning it, and next thing you know, it's like really flowery prose, but then also these like short connecting, and like the writing itself can sometimes suffer from over editing. So I would really encourage you to strive for an authentic voice in these essays, because again, we're just strangers that pick this up, and this is how I get to know you. So making sure that the voice of the applicant comes through, we didn't talk about the personal statement yet, but of course that's an important piece of this. But again, if the personal statement is written in this, beautiful flowing prose, and then you get to the leadership essay, which is a bunch of, very short targeted, like 4-word sentences, and you're like, did the same person write this thing? Like, I don't understand what happened here. So that's another piece, just making sure that the authentic voice of the applicant comes throughout the whole application packet is really important.
Lovely. Thank you, Anna. I was going to change over now to Samara and get your take as a recent applicant yourself and winner of Marshall Scholarship. It'd be really interesting to find out how you kind of tackled this section of the application. So to start with, I was wondering if you can maybe tell us, when it comes to like the writing portion, did you start with your personal statement, or did you kind of start with more of the potential questions? How did you kind of tackle that part?
Thanks, Kev. First of all, I want to say I came from UT Austin, which has a really established postgraduate office, which was really helpful throughout the whole process. One thing they did is months before they held a writing workshop for us, and this was less focused on, syntax and grammar and more kind of what Anna was getting at, like, how do you think about yourself in relation to these criteria? And how do you get away from kind of listing your resume as you're applying to these big scholarships and more tell the story of who you are? So I'll talk about some of the tools they gave us in that a little bit later, but that was really helpful. Also, I'll just note I applied to several other scholarships beforehand, like the Beinecke and the Truman. So I had a lot of material already on hand. I'm not saying that every applicant needs to be applying to all of these very time-consuming things, but if you have someone who's really interested in this and they're early enough in their academic undergraduate career, kind of encouraging them to apply to several of these just so they get the experience of writing applications, of interviewing. I think that really contributed to my success on the Marshall. I don't think I would have been successful if I had just done this as my first application. Besides that, I would say in terms of writing, I read a lot of other applications that my school provided beforehand, just so I could kind of get a range of what people wrote. Some people wrote very matter-of-factly, and some people took a more creative approach. And I think that was really helpful for me to kind of understand what route I would take. I also, like Anna and Haley emphasized, did a lot of research about what programs I wanted to do and why the UK was the right choice before I even started outlining, and that helped kind of make it a little bit more clear about what I should write in the different sections. I began with the personal statement, but I would say I wrote all of them kind of at once, just so I could make sure that I'm not covering something in the personal statement that could be better served in the leadership section or the ambassadorial potential. So I think it's really important for you to know enough about what's going in your personal statement that you can kind of outline those other sections as well.
Cool, thank you. You kind of just touched on there, kind of the tools that you kind of use, like your scholarship advisor provided. I was wondering if you can maybe touch on that, you know, the kind of feedback you got, and kind of like best practices you applied when going through the application.
Yeah. So one thing, like I said, I read a lot of other applications that the school provided specifically for the Marshall and Rhodes. If your school doesn't have kind of a backlog of that, they're hard to find online. So I would recommend just having people read med school and other grad school applications. They're not as, I think those are a little bit more direct and less creative than the Marshall applications that I read, but at least getting a sense of how people paint this picture of their undergraduate experience and their life experience and how that contributed to their decision to apply to either these scholarships or med school is really helpful, just to get kind of the language of how to apply. Besides that, they also had us do a really interesting exercise where they had us write down a list of 20 things that make you who you are. And, you know, they didn't say it needs to be like, oh, I did all of these courses. It's more like, oh, I had 2 dogs growing up, and, you know, I grew up with a single dad, or I'm Jewish. And that was actually really helpful because it got you thinking about how these different things in your past weaved into your research interests. They also had us do an Excel sheet listing all of our experiences, as well as the impact they had, what we learned from them, and how they shaped what we were interested in. And that really helped kind of with the leadership essay and being able to meet the criteria that Anna was talking about.
Perfect. And then just finally, what kind of challenges did you face then when writing these essays and your personal statement, and kind of how did you overcome if you were to find like these challenges coming your way?
I think the biggest one, for context, I was an English major and a sustainability major, and I kind of wanted to weave those two things together to say what I wanted to do with my future, but I kind of struggled with being more creative in my application. I wanted to kind of write a creative story, and I was reading a lot of applications that were just very bullet point, this is what I did, what I learned from it. And I would say I just, at the end of the day, that's who I am. So I stuck with that. And my advisors were very encouraging of that kind of writing choice, but also kind of pointed me in ways to make it so it wasn't just, you know, flowy prose that was confusing and didn't really get to the heart of who I was. So that was kind of the biggest challenge.
And then just, I was going to ask a quick question actually. Something that came through was about like, how do you kind of decide, or who do you ask then to be your who recommends like your recommendation letter? Like, I was just wondering like how you kind of chose those people to write for like your recommendation letter, and like, because that's a question we get a few times, is like who's like best suited to do that, and I just wondering how you went about that and deciding who would be your kind of recommender.
I definitely thought to the criteria of the application and wondered like who in my life and what would be able to speak to those criteria. So I had a couple work experiences in different realms. I worked at a writing center. I did a sustainability nonprofit work. So I kind of got those for like the more professional aspects. And then for kind of more of the character and just general aspects about who I am. I thought about who could speak to those better, but they don't need to all be necessarily people who can speak to your most great accomplishments, you know, in undergrad.
Thanks for that. And I don't know if you might have some thoughts on that as well when it comes to who to choose, or any advice you can give to people.
Yeah, I would say, as much as you can as scholarship advisors, I would recommend helping your applicants select letter writers who will put their best foot forward. I have read some wild things in reference letters, like speculating on medical conditions that students have and are suffering from. I mean, negative references, which, you know, of course, if they're commenting and saying that they don't think this applicant is fit for the academic program that they are applying for, that's valid information I have to take into account as a reviewer. But I have advised students in a previous role for national scholarship applications, and it broke my heart, right? Because I know, man, this kid put a lot of work into this. I know the advisor put a lot of work in, and it's really tough when you're being given letters that you feel like maybe are not putting the student's best foot forward. So I would just encourage you to make sure that the reference letter, this is another thing, make sure the reference letter writers understand that they are writing for a highly competitive national scholarship, especially if you are from an institution that does not typically have students apply for the Marshall. Number one, we welcome your applications. We encourage them. We would love them. But also reference letter writers, you know, I've seen from institutions that do not typically apply for Marshall, I've seen maybe like 1 or 2 paragraphs, which they can be great paragraphs, but also we're looking for a richness of context for this student as a learner, as a person, of course, through the lens of our criteria. We want to hear those anecdotes. It's helpful, of course, if they compare the student to others that they have worked with, that type of language of, top in X number of years, or in the top X percent in my career, or that kind of stuff. But I would just say, if you have a letter writer who is maybe not experienced, or at least experienced in the highly competitive national scholarship space, then I would encourage you to really make sure they understand the competitiveness. I mean, I think our selection is somewhere around 5%, 3 to 5%, something like that. So, letters are an important part of giving us complete strangers really a more full and rounded picture of your applicant.
Samara, I see you've got your hand up. Do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, just to build off what Anna was saying, I prepared a 2-pager for each recommender that I was asking to write a letter about the Marshall Scholarship, reminding them of what I did with them, or, what grades I got in their class. So they had that information all on hand, kind of summarizing what I wanted to get out of the scholarship and why it was the right choice for me, and any other feedback that my scholarship office told me to put on there. So the writing process could be very direct for them, even if they had never written one for the Marshall or Rhodes before. So I really recommend getting students to do that, and also making sure they're being, very respectful when they're asking for this much of a recommender's time.
Good points there. And then just to close the loop before we turn over to some of the questions that are coming in, please keep them coming if you've got a question. We'll do some Q&A now. But I just want to kind of close the loop on the application process, because there has been a few questions that have come through previously about the mechanics of uploading material, kind of like that kind of like end stage of the application process. And then someone's asked, what's the student's responsibility? What's the institution's responsibility? That type of thing. So I don't know, Haley, if you might be able to kind of give us a bit of what to expect when you're ready to kind of submit that application. What's required from the student, and then what's required from the institution.
Sorry, in terms of after the application's been submitted, like what are the next steps?
Yeah, so just some of the questions we got them through was one was the mechanics of uploading material, and then like what's the student's responsibility, and then what's the institution's responsibility.
Yeah, sure. So I guess the mechanics are that for the student deadline, that the entire application should be complete, and the recommenders have the same deadline as the students as well. However, if there are any issues with the recommender uploading their recommendation by that student deadline, there is, you know, a grace period between the kind of final institutional deadline, which is on the 26th. So we do have advice and guidance that Embark have provided on how to manually upload a recommender on their behalf, which is available on our Google Drive, which has been shared and on the emails. But if you aren't sure what that is, just email the applications inbox if you're an advisor, and we can point you in that direction. So the recommenders should receive a link and be able to upload that way. If they have any issues, they can reach out to you as an advisor. If you have any issues, you can always reach out to our Embark colleagues. There's one email address for students who are having issues and one email address for advisors. I can put that in the chat as well. But as an advisor, as the endorsing institution, you then upload the endorsement letter, which is typically provided by the provost, academic dean, someone of that equivalent at your institution. There's more information about what that letter looks like on our website, but that's, you know, you're endorsing the application, saying, you know, kind of giving the check that this person is who they say they are, you know, all of the writing is kind of from themselves, and, you know, all of that kind of due diligence. As an endorser, that's what you're kind of doing. You're uploading the endorsement letter and then finally submitting. So that in some ways the student submits to you and then you submit to us, if you want to think of it that way. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you for that, Haley. In terms of some of the questions now, one of the questions, and I'll throw this out to the panel, see who wants to answer it.
I think Anna had her hand raised. Sorry, I don't know if that was to jump.
Yeah, I just wanted to build just super quick, Kev, on what Haley said about the institutional endorsement. I find that, yes, all the information that Haley said is in your institutional endorsement for sure. I also find that the ones that I especially appreciate are those that are almost like an executive summary of this application. Because again, I'm a complete stranger coming into this and I've got a pile of these to read. And so if I can go to the institutional endorsement, and for this, how I like to do it, I like to go to the institutional endorsement and be like, okay, what are we dealing with here? Executive summary. What are this person's goals? What are their strengths? You know, it can be kind of like a summarizing, not, you know, 5 pages here, but a brief kind of overview of who this applicant is, an introduction. And sometimes I've seen institutional endorsements that even will pull quotes from reference letters to substantiate, you know, the institution says this is one of our top candidates ever. And, you know, Professor Quieter also believes this when she said, blah, 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 right? So you can treat it as kind of this executive summary, rather than just like, yes, we sign off on them and we think they would be fabulous for the Marshall Scholarship. Here's, you know, 5 sentences about that. Anyway, so I just wanted to add that in.
No, perfect. Thank you for that. So the question is, if a letter writer speaks to a particular experience / class that they oversaw the student on, does the students need to speak to that same class experience somewhere in their essay responses, e.g. in the leadership ambassadorial personal statement? So I think that's a question of, do they need to match up to what's being written about them in their letter? I
think that it doesn't. I was actually thinking about this when we were talking about the reference letters. it's not like each piece has to repeat the same information, because we realize, right, there's limited word count, and we want to get the most complete picture of how your applicant addresses our criteria. And so I would say, if the student had a seminal, meaningful experience in that particular class or that situation, then they're welcome to talk about that. Of course, I would encourage them to do so from their perspective. And then if the professor for that class or other, activity, whether it was a club or employment or something, if they're going to talk about the same experience, I would encourage them to do so with it should be a different spin on the same information, right? So they were able to observe the growth of this applicant and substantiate that it happened, and they saw it in this way, and they can compare it to other people in a similar situation. But don't feel like you have to keep repeating the same information over and over. I really assure you, I can speak for myself and my committee. We really do read it all. It's not like I know I see sometimes online, your reviewer spends 30 seconds skimming your packet, and I, that's not how I approach this. I really, I view it as, I'm like, I want to move everyone forward. And so I'm like reading it to be like, yes, I'm with you. I'm your number one champion. Until I start saying, oh, I'm actually not, I'm not seeing this criteria, or, oh, they talked about this experience. Is that leadership experience really making an impact? Like, it's almost like deducting points where everyone starts with, maximum in my brain when I'm doing this. But anyways, though, so I would say you don't have to use the same information over and over, but if you are, make sure there's something new and unique and a different spin on it every time you're presenting it in the packet, so that it's adding to the picture of the student.
Cool. Yeah, thank you for that, Anna. Next question. If a recommender makes a small factual error in a letter, is that a problem that needs to be fixed by the recommender? If so, how does that work? I don't know if that's would that be an application tool question, perhaps, Haley, for Embark, if they need to make a change to, I don't know if they mean it's already been submitted, or if it's been uploaded but not submitted. I don't know if that would make a change to how they would then go about fixing an error to the letter.
Yeah, that's something that Embark can definitely help with. If it has not been submitted by the student, then the student can reach out to Embark through help@embark.com. And if it has been submitted to the advisor, then and they want to know how to send it back to the recommender, for example, or delete it and upload a new one, then Embark can help, and that's client support@embark.com.
Thank you for
I mean,
that.
I'll just say from my perspective, right? Like, I get it. These are busy professionals that you're asking them to write a detailed, comprehensive, unique letter for. And, I try to not hold it against a student, certainly, if there's clearly a factual error on the part of the letter writer. It's, I can't tell you how many times I've seen, they're happy to endorse the student for the roads, right? And then I get it, right? I get it. So it's not like you realize that and you have to correct it. I mean, for me, I just know that it's human error is a thing, and I don't think it's a big deal. But I will say, if they have something really different, like they have the wrong name of a class for a student, then I'll be like, oh, that's kind of weird. Because then you're like, well, is this the right letter writer, or, things like that. I find a little more like they just raise questions for me. But if it's, minor information, I just typos, I mean, not like egregiously, tons of typos, but, a few typos or something, like you get that it's human error happens.
We've been asked, can we talk a bit more about the ambassadorial potential essay, how it's changed, and what we're hoping these changes will produce in this year's essays?
Yeah, so there had been feedback that it wasn't necessarily as easy to both answer the question and relate the answer to the criteria. So the hope was that by tweaking the question a bit, it better matches the criteria that we've outlined so that applicants are able to answer the question and the criteria at the same time. So that was the kind of reasoning behind the change. It hasn't changed significantly. It's still asking about, the UK, US kind of connection. And I think the updated question refers to maybe more tangible experiences that the applicant can relate to based on their experiences academically and work related and elsewhere in hobbies, extracurricular activities. Whereas the previous question was a bit more kind of abstract in that how can they enhance the US-UK relationship. So we're hoping that the changes are helpful and easier for applicants to answer. So that's what was the kind of reasoning behind the changes.
And I was just wondering, Samara, then, given you're a recent applicant yourself, how did you kind of tackle that ambassadorial potential essay question? Like, when you wrote out your essay, how was your kind of thoughts behind your answer behind it? Any kind of like top tips you can maybe give?
Yeah, so as I said, I'm interested in sustainability. So I approached it more from, as a world, we're looking for sustainable solutions, and the UK happens to be a leader in when you compare America versus UK in that. So I kind of talked about what I would learn from being in the UK about their climate change work, and then how I could bring that to the US and kind of work for an environmental policy think tank or NGO and kind of establish connections between the UK and the US. So that's kind of how I looked at it.
Oh, that's great. Another question we've got here, I think, do you have any advice for applicants applying to the one-year Marshall? If there are any past successful one-year Marshall applicants, how have these students successfully justified their reasoning for applying to a 1 year instead of a 2-year scholarship? Do you want to take that one, Anna?
Let me unmute. So this is one of those things that every year we on the selection committee, we look to the MAC to advise us on how to interpret the criteria in our annual, reviewer handbook. So in terms of the one-year Marshall, we do ask, I believe we've recently started asking for substantiating why a one-year Marshall scholarship is necessary. And so that's something where we look to have a clear reason, because again, remember the motivation of the Marshall Scholarship is building people-to-people connections between the United Kingdom and the United States. So if you're going to cut short the typical period by a full year, right, do half as much as you typically would do, why do you want to do that? Right? How are you still reaching the goals of the Marshall Scholarship by spending half as much time meeting the people, immersed in the culture, building those relationships and, all of that type of thing. So that's one piece of it. Secondly, we're very aware that we want you to be able to be in the United Kingdom for that year, for your one-year Marshall. So your post-scholarship plan is really important because we don't, at least myself, I'm looking at this and I'm like, okay, well, if the student, if they have a deferral for a program where they can only get a one-year deferral, but they know for a fact that they're going to be doing that program once they finish their one-year Marshall, I'm like, okay, they could be spending that year really immersed in the UK, doing their proposed academic program. Like, great, they're going to be really locked in for that year. But if it's a candidate who has a reason why they want to do the 1 year, but then they don't really have a very clear, immediately starting post-scholarship plan, then I'm like, okay, well, this person, maybe they're going to be job hunting or doing graduate school applications for the year they're in the UK, or, how are they really going to be, have they provided evidence to us that this applicant will be able to be fully engaged and immersed in their Marshall Scholarship experience for that year when they don't have a substantial, very clearly articulated and actionable post-scholarship plan immediately upon the ending of their one-year Marshall. So those are some of the things that we think about, because again, our charge is to interpret the priorities of the Marshall Scholarship and execute on behalf of the British government. That's what we're doing as the selection committee. So those are some of the ways that we think about what questions we have and the data and the information that are provided in the application when trying to assess who would be the best candidates to help the British government achieve their goals for the Marshall Scholarship.
And then just on the back of that, one of the other questions we have come through is the post-scholarship plans essays. It's very short. Applicants don't really have the room to explain their plans in depth. Would you recommend that candidates elaborate these plans elsewhere? If so, where?
So I think it's funny. It can be, I've seen it as a double-edged sword. I've seen, because I'm the lead for the STEM. So some of them, the STEM people, it's like their sentence is, I've been accepted to this, PhD program and I have a 2-year deferral and that's what I'm going to be doing. And then after that, I want to be a professor. So they're kind of like, okay, we've got our 2 sentences down that cover the next 25 years of my life. What else should I be putting here? So I think it can really go either way depending upon the candidate. I think that what we're looking for, at least on the way my committee talks about it, is do you have a clear sense of, right, the further into the future, the more murky these things are, right? Because, here I am, I did a PhD in astronomy and I thought I was going to be a professor. Now I'm a science policy expert and lobbyist. So, you would hope that this experience would change a person and help them see things differently and broaden their perspective and all of that. But we do look to say, okay, like immediately following scholarship, do they have some clear ideas on organizations they might want to work for, or goals, activities they want to be doing? And then into the future, where do they see themselves positioned? Do they see themselves positioned as a leader in their field? Do they have a realistic sense? Are they, how many people say that they ultimately want to be president of the United States? Is there a clear path to doing that? It's a hard thing to really judge, but you want to see that this student has self-awareness. It goes back to our criteria. Do they have self-awareness? Do they understand their role as a change maker and their ability to make impact in their local and broader communities? And how do they envision enacting that in their future plans? It doesn't have to be this, I want to do this and then this, if you're too rigid, then we're all like, well, that's probably not going to work out, but at least we can kind of see where you're going. Whereas if it's too nebulous, it's kind of like, do they have a sense of themselves as a leader and change maker? Hard to say. Do they have a certain level of ambition? Like how do they fit? So personally, I would rather see people err on the side of kind of really gaming it out and showing deep thought about how their future could play out versus like, I'll work for an organization and kind of just see where it goes. So that's my personal take on it. But yeah, I get all of these things are short. And let me just also say, we all realize these are young people, okay? Like most of them are young. You don't have to be young. You have to be within a certain number of years of graduating with your undergraduate degree. So we don't have an age criteria, but typical Marshall applicants are younger folks. And so we realize life is laying out before them. So don't feel like no one's going to come hold you to it, like hunt you down and take your Marshall back if you don't follow your plan. I'm evidence of that. But we do want to see, have they been thoughtful? And again, all through the lens of our criteria. Are they demonstrating their knowledge and commitment and execution of our selection criteria through their post-scholarship plan? Okay, I'll
Thanks.
stop talking.
Apologies, my internet seems to be a bit unstable at the moment. It keeps freezing on me. So if I do drop out, that'll be why, because the embassy Wi-Fi has failed me. But we've got about 5 minutes left. So I just want to kind of quickly touch on, to end with, sorry. We've had a few of the comments come through from the Google form that some people are either new to the Marshall Scholarship and advising their applicants, or they're maybe a more newer fellowship advisor themselves. So just to kind of like address that, one of the questions was the people would like to know kind of like the basics and some kind of strategies to help with their students with their application. So I think just to finish on, is there any kind of like top tips, kind of like best practices, or just kind of general advice you would give to maybe someone who's more new to the Marshall Scholarship, and how best to advise their students on how to do this, the application process? And I think I'll go with Anna to start with on that, but then I'll be interested to hear Samara's kind of take from her side, because you kind of mentioned about your university having that kind of graduate program, and it would just be interested to see what you've kind of took away from that. So we'll start with Anna though on that part.
Ooh, okay. So I would say if you're new to this, to the Marshall, you, the scholarship advisor, are new to it, I really do encourage you to lean into NAFA. I know I'm a former NAFA member. I know you guys have an excellent network, support network of very generous colleagues. So I encourage you to really lean into that expertise and the generous, deep well that is the NAFANs. So that's my first thing. Second thing, really pay attention to our criteria. Make sure that, I know I keep saying this, but this is again a common kind of issue that I see. Make sure that your student is your applicant is really leaning in and executing against those. I would also say for your applicant themselves, look, it's really putting these things together, right? It takes a lot of time. It's a lot of soul searching. I mean, I remember going through mine. I think I literally had over 20 drafts at one point on mine. So I would say encouraging your applicant to be compassionate and patient with themselves, and knowing that, yeah, this is tough work. This is like some deep introspection type stuff. Who you are, condensing yourself into this page for some stranger to rate you. I mean, I have my own like philosophical, things I work through on this. But my point is, please ensure that they know their worth as people, the value that they have, the impact that they will have is not tied to how they do in a scholarship competition or any kind of competition. Please make sure they know that. I will be very candid here, even though we're being recorded. The first time I served on the selection committee, I cried like when I had to shortlist, because I was like, how do I make such a monumental decision? And how do I, I had to be like coached by our committee chair to be like, look, this is the job you signed, and you're here to try and do the best. And we have these criteria and whatever. And so, there are real people like me that are really rooting for them. And I know I was rejected outright by the Rhodes. So I know how that goes. So I just wanted to say, be compassionate with them. Please encourage them to be gentle with themselves and encourage them to lean into the process. It can be a very fruitful process of self-discovery and writing. Your writing can really improve. But don't tie how I say it is internalize the wins and just let the losses roll off your back, right? Yeah, that's just the way it is in life, So if you win, it's definitely because you're awesome. If you lose, it's because they didn't understand and see your brilliance.
Well said. Samara, then from your kind of point of view, having gone through it, what could you maybe give some tips for new fellowship advisors on how best to support their students going through this application?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little late for this year, but I do think starting the process early, about 6 months in advance, and creating sort of a community around it, like Anna was saying, it's a very hard process, can be a little bit lonely. And I do think some people get overwhelmed by how difficult it looks and start comparing themselves to winners. I know I looked on the website and it seemed everyone I looked at had started their own nonprofit. And I was like, I have never done that. So kind of having a community, seeing that them at the writing workshop and knowing that a lot of people at the school were going through this process helped me kind of stay in the game. And like Anna was saying, my advisors were very encouraging about like the benefit of going through the process rather than the outcome, and that being why we were doing this. And that helped me feel like no matter what the outcome was, it was worth the amount of time I was putting in. And then I do think like some of the more established scholarship offices, I know at least UT like would be willing to share some of the materials that they kind of use to prep their students. So I think learning from those more established programs and kind of getting a sense of what different schools do would be really helpful.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So unfortunately we ran out of time now. We've reached our mark. So just want to say thank you for everyone for joining us today. Hopefully you found this session useful. Feel free to reach out if you have any kind of additional questions or just need some general advice going forward. The deadline is fastly approaching us, so bear that in mind. But just, yeah, thank you to our panelists today. I really appreciate your time and your perspectives on this process. So thank you very much for that. The session has been recorded, so I'm going to work on getting that up onto YouTube, and then I'll give the link to Hayley to post with NAPFA. So feel free to watch back if there's any part you want to kind of re-listen to and get some write it down, kind of what was said. That'll be available to you shortly. But yeah, so thank you everyone, and we'll hope to see you again for the next one. Bye.